Hi, this is David at Mash IT, and this is our second unboxing of the day. We've already put the MacBook Pro Apple Silicon on the channel. That was unboxed with our first thoughts and a few benchmarks. We did that earlier, so check that out as well if you're interested. And this is the new Apple Silicon MacBook Air base model, so the 7 GPU core version as opposed to the 8 core that on the higher end. So let's unbox it and take a look. Rid of that. Okay. So we're so used to buying MacBook Pros here. Buying an Air, we obviously get a new colour choice. So we have gone for the gold. See what that looks like. Just have something a little bit different. So let's open the box and take a look. Actually quite nice. There you go. So there is the MacBook Air. Put that down for a second and take a look what else we've got in the box. We've got the usual USB-C power cable, the usual pamphlets, any stickers in there, some Apple stickers in gold, very nice to go with the laptop, and this is a 30 watt USB-C charger with a UK adapter because we are in the UK. So obviously a much smaller size than with the Pro, which came with a 61 adapter. So that certainly makes it much more portable, which is quite nice. That is it. Right, let's take a look at the laptop. So here we go, the gold version. It's actually really quite pretty. We've got the MacBook Air, so we've only got the two Thunderbolt USB 4 ports on the left and a headset jack on the right, and that is it for the ports. We've got the usual Air wedge shape. It's quite sturdy feeling, but nice and light. Let's open it up, especially one hand, but a little bit sticky. So Apple Chime is back. So these ship with Big Sur, obviously with this new release with the Apple Silicon. I'll skip some of this out for you so you don't have to go through my boring setup process. So this MacBook Air has True Tone like the MacBook Pro, and apparently now it has a P3 colour gamut screen. It's just not as bright. It's 400 nits compared to the MacBook Pro's 500, but it does look really nice so far. So just get to the end of setting the Mac up and we should get into Big Sur. This is the base model that I've bought of the MacBook Air. It has 8GB of RAM, it has 256GB of SSD storage, and this one, because it's the base, it's got the 8-core CPU but a 7-core GPU. The higher end model of the MacBook Air has the 8-core GPU, the same as the MacBook Pro. The higher end model of this MacBook Air has the 8-core GPU, which is the same as the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini. So we've got obviously the nice gold deck with this model and a nice large haptic trackpad with the force feedback. And again, like the last year's Intels, you've got the lovely Magic Keyboard, absolutely great to type on. The thing that I like about the MacBook Air over the Pros is you don't have the touch bar, because I just can't get used to the touch bar, I don't like it. So you've got the dedicated function keys with the MacBook Air, but you still have the Apple Pay and Touch ID button on the top right. So nice little feature there. So here we are, we're in. Max brightness, so 400 nits, and obviously I'm in sort of a bright studio at the moment, but it's nice and crisp and clear. It's pretty good to my eyes. Keyboard feels great. I do love the Apple trackpad. It's definitely the best trackpad on the market. I'm going to just download a few benchmarks now, and then I'm going to run a few performance tests and compare it to the MacBook Pro we've just had a look at and see how they compare to each other. This one has no fan, so it's completely fanless, so it's not going to perform as well as the MacBook Pro, but I'm interested to see how much of a difference there is. So I'm just going to download those and we're going to run those. Okay, so I've run the Blackmagic disk speed test on this MacBook Air, and this is the base model with 256GB SSD, and the scores are 2175 megabytes a second write and 2667 megabytes a second for read. That's really similar to what the MacBook Pro scored with the same SSD. So I'm figuring it's exactly the same technology and the same SSDs they're using between the two models. So that's nice to know if you're buying the cheaper Air. Now we're going to look at Geekbench 5. We're going to run the CPU benchmark first. Okay, so for the CPU portion of the Geekbench 5 score, the single core got 1,739 and the multi-core scored 7,569. So in comparison to the MacBook Pro with the fan, the scores are actually identical on this test. So that's really quite impressive for this fanless Air. Now the thing I did notice on the MacBook Pro versus this one is the MacBook Pro's fan didn't fire up either. The only time it fired up was further on in a Cinebench test. So I'm going to run Open CL. This is the 7 GPU core version with this MacBook Air. So let's see how this compares to the MacBook Pro. So the OpenCL score for this MacBook Air is 17,258. In comparison, the 8-core MacBook Pro scored 19,149. So you can see that one extra GPU core does make a little bit of a difference. How much that will relate to in real-time performance we'll look at in a further review on performance down the line. But you know, realistically, considering this is the base model, that's not that big a difference. Let's move on to Cinebench. So we're going to run Cinebench now, and without the fan, this might throttle, so we'll see what that scores. We're just going to run the multi-core score, because that's most important for this one, I think. This takes quite a while to run, so I'll skip through most of it just to get to the results. Okay, so the MacBook Air has finished the test on Cinebench multi-core, and we have a score of 6,821 points. Still an amazing score, but compared to the MacBook Pro, which has a fan in it, which will obviously stop it from throttling down, that one scored 7,706 points. So you can see the fan has made a difference. But if you want a fanless machine, I mean, that is still an amazing score. If you hadn't seen them, you know, the MacBook Pro, you'd be really impressed with that. But having had both together, that MacBook Pro, that is scoring a fair bit higher. But for a fanless design, that is brilliant. Okay, so whilst we were running all these tests, we were running on battery. It's been running for a couple of hours now, and we're down to about 66%, down from about 80%. So initially, the battery figures seem really strong in comparison to what we're doing on this laptop. Now we will do a full battery test for the review, but so far initial thoughts are the battery is very impressive on this MacBook Air. So in conclusion, just for my initial thoughts and a couple of hours using the machine and a few benchmarks, this is a massive step in the right direction from Apple. The previous MacBook Air with a fan and Intel processor was incredibly sluggish in comparison to this. Really hot and really noisy. This is now fanless, but still scores amazingly well and does brilliantly in CPU and GPU benchmarks. Now we will do more real-life applications and some games for the performance testing we're going to be doing on this machine. But just from synthetic benchmarks alone, you can see how much extra power has gone into this laptop over the Intel in this MacBook Air. The MacBook Pro has gone from a powerful machine to an incredibly powerful machine. This MacBook Air has gone from a very sluggish, low-end machine that's for casual users to a really high-performance machine that you could actually do some video editing or Photoshop or some higher-powered work on. So this one here is a massive, massive step in the right direction from Apple. This laptop is obviously a great laptop for the majority of people to buy, which is what the MacBook Air was always about. It's a lot cheaper than the Pro, yet you're getting the majority of the same specs as the Pro. The True Tone screen with P3 colour gamut, a great Magic Keyboard, a decent haptic touchpad. The screen is 100 nits less, but the majority of the time you're not really going to notice that. And you don't get the touch bar. Now for me personally, that is a plus. I much prefer having dedicated keys over a touch bar. I know that some applications utilise the touch bar and are quite useful, but for me it's a hindrance more often than an actual help. So I would rather have the MacBook Air with a better typing angle and an actual dedicated function keys than I ever would the touch bar. So I think for the majority of users, this is a fantastic machine and the go-to machine I think now for most Apple buyers. There will be a full review and a performance section, and I'm going to do like a little gaming section on it as well to see how well it handles games over the next couple of days. So please subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see the forthcoming content on that. Thank you for watching.